We will move to our last agenda item today, other than board member reports. Item 6.3 are community college contributions to jobs in the economy. This was a report requested by several board members last time, as I recall. So I thank you, Vice Chancellor, for coming back to talk to us. Please proceed.
Absolutely. Good morning. So I'm delighted we get to focus again on jobs and the economy. And for this session, we have a standing panel at all the board meeting. For this session, I wanted to pause from sharing effective models in workforce programs. Instead, use this session to build context for a series of conversations that we're having in the field, themed around the topic of doing what matters for jobs and the economy, doing what matters for jobs and the economy. And if you take a look at your folder, which Vice Chancellor Feast and team had created, you'll see that on the inside, it begins to carry this theme. And it's a framework for how we will begin spending our time based on the feedback that we hear from the field and our various stakeholders. And you may wonder why do we need to tee up a framework that relooks how we're approaching jobs and the economy. After all, we're getting recognized by the White House, Council on Jobs and Competitiveness. Are we doing enough around this mission? I mean, aren't we doing enough around this mission? And so what I did today was invited two panel members who can really articulate the new higher bar expected of the community colleges around this area of workforce development and career technical education. To my right is Tim Rainey. Tim is the new executive director of the California Workforce Investment Board, appointed by Governor Brown. Tim came from the California Labor Federation.
Usually to her left.
We actually crossed paths quite a bit in my prior life, and even though I came from industry and he came from labor, I saw Tim as someone who thinks very expansively with regards to workforce development and how do we have agencies working together, bringing our strengths to bear in order to ensure the workforce health of the state of California. And then to my left is someone who needs no introduction. This is Nancy Shulock, who is Executive Director of the Institute for Higher Education Leadership and Policy. Her research has shaped many policy discussion across the street, and she was a member, as Commissioner McDougall can attest to, as well as Commissioner Baca, contributed greatly to the discussions around SB 1143 Student Success Task Force. So I, as in our standing tradition, have prepared some very hard questions for them. So Tim, as the new executive director for the California Workforce Investment Board, you're grappling with 2.1 million unemployed people, not to mention the workforce that is needed to reposition California for recovery and growth. What role do community colleges have in this work?
Thanks. I didn't have a chance to look at this beforehand, so this is the first time I've heard this question. Vaughn said we're going to have a coffee discussion, so I've been waiting back there drinking coffee the whole time, so I might be a little jittery. So the 2 million unemployed workers, it's now on me. It's my problem. Not really. It's all of our problem. It's not just the fact that 2 million people in California are employed. The problem is that we're 3 years beyond the official end of the recession, and we still have 2 million people in California unemployed. A third of those folks have been out of the labor market for over a year, and many have been out of the labor market for 2 years or longer. And as you know, when you're not working, the skills that you had that made you successful while you were in the labor market are rusty or obsolete. Your job may have gone away entirely, so you've got to start all over again. So I think what we're trying to think about at the State Workforce Board and in conversations with our partners across state agencies who are looking at workforce development, economic development, and education is it's not the new economy, it's not the green economy, we're really in the retraining economy. We've got to be thinking in those terms. Folks are going to have to be able to check back into the education and training system many times throughout the course of their working life to get skill upgrading, to get retrained, and to get certifications that meet industry's needs. Another wrinkle in the whole thing that is a big concern, the federal government now tracks churn in the economy. And in California, before the recession, every month, there are 1 million job separations every month. That means involuntarily people are disconnected from their employer, falling out of the labor market and making their way back in. 1 million times a month. And every time a person is disconnected from a job, goes back and finds a new job, he or she loses 17% of his or her income. Every month this is occurring in California, a real high level of churn. It used to be just the Silicon Valley, and we sort of understood that. It's the entire economy, not just California's, but the national economy. It's also happening in Europe. You could see why we have such a concern with the eroding middle class. This is the reality. So we've got to really build our education and training systems as a buffer for the middle class, not just the community colleges, but K-12 and the Workforce Investment Act and all of our investments, federal, state, and local, to help folks be able to check into education and training and then get back successfully in the labor market, not once, not twice, but 6 or 7 or 8 times through the course of their working life. My dad my dad didn't do this. He churned through the labor market. This started when he was about midway through his career, but my grandfather retired with the same employer he went to work with right out of school. That's not the case anymore. It's not happening for the vast majority of us. Just one other point, if I could. In the labor market, you guys know this, the vast majority of jobs are not folks who have BAs, and it's not even the lower skilled side. 49 to 50% of the jobs in the labor market, and in fact the fastest growth, is in what we call middle skilled jobs that require less than a bachelor's degree, but some high level, in many cases, of post-secondary education and training. This is a great opportunity for us, especially because we have such a strong institution of training for those very kinds of careers. But we've got to do a better job these days of integrating our funding because everybody's got less.
Thank you. Okay, Nancy, you just released a new report called the California Community College CTE and the College Completion Agenda. And you started with an interesting hypothesis that the system's policies and practices are more geared toward the academic transfer mission. Now tell us more about this hypothesis and how it affects our ability to deliver on the workforce and career education mission of the system.
Okay, thank you. We just did actually put out 2 reports. It's 2 of a 4-part series. We haven't printed these, but they're available on our website. And we called it Career Opportunities and Career Technical Education and the College Completion Agenda, to really emphasize that so much of the national discussion about college completion agenda seems somehow to forget that community colleges are colleges, and that completing certificates and career-oriented associate degrees are a hugely important part of the completion agenda. And I think that we wanted to turn our attention, about 1.5 years ago we started this, to CTE, to emphasize a huge opportunity for this system to increase its value to students and to the California economy by giving more priority to CTE. This is a mission that the community colleges excel at. It's a mission that no other segment even begins to touch what it is that you do. And as Tim said, and as your background material said, so many of the programs that are short of the baccalaureate, so many of the certificate and associate degree programs offer so much economic return now in today's economy to students. But we're finding and concluding that this mission area could be so much more valuable. There's such an untapped potential. It could be so much more valuable to students and employers and the economy with more strategic vision and coordination, more careful targeting of programs to meet the needs of the workforce, and better support both in terms of funding and policy. And you asked me about policy and our hypothesis in this project. We always look at policy because we believe policy sets the rules and by which the colleges and students live. So policy shapes what happens. And CTE educators with whom we've been speaking tell us that some of the rules aren't working as well as they could for them in the CTE mission. And that's because I feel that there's always been this transfer bias in the system, and it's certainly in the legislature. And you go to the legislature, they want to know. They know that the community colleges are a great provider for the workforce, but they always just kind of fall back on, well, what's the transfer rate? And so I think that the transfer bias in the system, we see it in the language that we use in terms of, we talk about CTE and academic. We see it in the leadership, in who occupies positions of leadership in most of the colleges, where they come from. We see it in the organizational, this I'm talking about me being the transfer bias and the less attention, I think, than we need for CTE. We see it in the organizational structures that kind of create silos that aren't helpful to allow for more integration. We see it in the messages that students in high schools are really not encouraged to find their way into a CTE program and pathway. They're told to go get started on your general education, and they miss these tremendous opportunities. And we also see it in the messages in terms of our reporting and accountability, because we haven't yet developed good ways to tell the story about what comes out of our CTE mission area. So I've just got some examples to specifically answer your question about how the policies may have been designed more purposefully for the transfer mission and may not be as supportive as they could be for CTE. And these are ones we're hearing from our conversations with the CTE community. Curriculum approval processes are too slow often to meet labor market needs before it's too late. Secondly, policies for hiring adjunct faculty can prevent CTE programs from hiring the most talented individuals. Faculty workload policies don't give credit for a lot of the important work that CTE faculty in particular have to do to reach out to employers to keep curriculum current and to build the partnerships that are so important for the effective operation of CTE. Transfer policies discount so much of the specialized coursework that CTE programs entail, because by definition, for the vocationally oriented associate degrees, you often want to have more major coursework than the couple of courses that you've heard discussed in terms of the transfer associate degree. But then by definition, all of these specialized courses are lower division, and then you go to the CSU and they say, well, even though they may teach the exact same content, they teach it upper division, you teach it lower division, and so there's a huge disconnect there in policy for students being able to transfer their specialized CTE work. Fifth, the Basic Skills Initiative, which of course has been a huge priority across the system for years, hasn't, I think, adequately addressed the unique character of CTE in terms of a lot of the certificate programs don't even address proficiency requirements for reading and math. There's just nothing about them. And then the approach to basic skills, and I'm encouraged that will probably be changing now along with other things under the task force. But the contextualized instruction has not really been a big focus so far that could be really helpful for CTE. And finally, funding policies include no real good provision for addressing the often higher costs of CTE programs. And so, unfortunately, when colleges look to cut programs or cut courses, it seems that CTE takes a disproportionate higher part of the cut. And it also, because of the lack of provision for addressing the higher costs, it forces CTE educators to go out and just be heroic entrepreneurs, trying to scramble and scrape together, funding as they can find it, which seems to be unfortunate. So those are some examples of policies. And for the rest of we're still working on this four-part project, and it ultimately is going to more comprehensively address the policy agenda, where the policies might work better for CTE than they do now.
So I purposely sat myself in between, because I think you can feel the pressure that I'm under with the conversations here. And that's why I'm giving you a preview on the work that needs to be done with regards to the system. So to add further to the conversation, Tim, at the federal level, the Government Accountability Office just released a new report highlighting the effectiveness of sector-focused partnerships in meeting the skill needs of workers and businesses. And what is your thought for the role of community colleges in sector strategy?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. I thought the GAO report was really interesting and that thick. When I looked at it after you sent it over to me, I thought, wow, this is the work I've been doing the last 5 years, and I thought the report really captured what's going on. The last 5 years of the Labor Federation, my job was to broker labor management training partnerships at the local level, at the regional level, in a bunch of different sectors where we have growth and a lot of good jobs. And in that work, I worked with local workforce investment boards and community colleges. And the same issues continued to come up. And they usually revolved around the need to align funding streams to address policies, administrative barriers to making the funding work together. Because we always started with industry, and when I say industry from the labor perspective, I mean labor and business, who said, this is what we need, this is what the data tells us, this is where the growth is, and these are the barriers we have to getting a qualified workforce to help us grow, help our companies grow. And if we grow, we can add more jobs. And then you turn around to the public workforce system, you say, all right, that's what they said. And by the way, you've got to translate because everybody's speaking a different language. The trouble really begins on how you make the programs fit what the industry really needs. And therein lies the role of a broker, and sometimes it is rocket science. You have to know enough about the public workforce system, you have to know enough about the colleges and the Workforce Investment Act monies and how it all sort of, how it works and how it can fit together, and then you buffer the employer against sort of the public system speak. So I encourage you to look at the report. I think it's instructive. There are a few sort of things that work best, I think, in workforce development and getting people access to good jobs and developing career pathways within the education training system that get people from the point of little or no skills and the need to leverage the basic skills training and contextualize it for the sector, all the way up to an actual job. And that should always be the goal, a real job, right? Not just training for the sake of training. It's got to be regionally based. California doesn't compete globally. We're not a big economy. We're a bunch of smaller regionally based economies. So it's got to be regionally based, and it's got to reflect the regional economy. It's got to be industry driven. A lot of people say they're doing sector work. It's not sector work if you're working with one employer, and it's certainly not sector work if you're not listening to employers. You don't have them at the table. It's got to be multiple employers around a cluster or multiple employers within a sector. They're advising you on what to do. You've got to figure out, you really got to map out the pathway in collaboration with your college partners and with your workforce partners, community-based organizations, and other organizations that are funding pieces of the pathway. Got to be really clear about what that pathway looks like and start piecing the thing together. You have to have the clear on-ramps and off-ramps. Not everybody's going to start at the gate and then finish at the finish line. They're going to enter the system at various points. They're going to come in through the college. They're going to come in through a community-based organization. They're going to come in through a one-stop career center. Multiple entry points into the pathway. It's got to be clear leading to a job. And then finally, and this is maybe my bias, and what I've learned really works, is you can't just have industry at the table. You can't just have the education training partners at the table, the public system. In my experience, it works if you have students there too and workers helping to inform you about what's really working and what's not working for them. In the labor world, it was always easy because labor is organized, right? They're there. When you work in an industry where there's not a lot of density with unions, you've got to do extra work to outreach to the people who are going to be affected by the training and education pathway that you're building. So having them involved, that right there makes it what we call high road, when you have workers and students actually involved in the planning and implementation. And just one little item at the President's Jobs Council meeting we had yesterday at Saddleback College. Saddleback College just blew me away. I mean, just fantastic program in allied health. We had a discussion about the demand for jobs in the health industry with healthcare reform. The biggest, by far, number of open jobs in the health care industry are allied health. And again, those don't mostly require BAs. It's the middle skilled jobs. And the data is pretty startling, and it's got a lot of industry folks very nervous. In the next 10 to 15 years, with retirements and new job creation, there are going to be, in just allied health alone, 1 million job openings, 1 million new jobs in California alone. This is huge, and this is not taking into consideration healthcare reform, which is going to really drive a great deal of demand on the primary side of healthcare. And all the allied health pieces that support primary care are going to boost as a result of that. So 1 million plus jobs over the next. We've got to figure out how to line up to meet this demand. It's the same story, though, in manufacturing and goods movement, in hospitality and entertainment. Every major core sector in the state of California is looking at these kinds of numbers going forward. And it's largely it's a combination of retirements, we call replacements, and new job creation. And I don't think, my anxiety is I don't think we're prepared to meet this impending jobs crisis. The irony is we've got an employment crisis right now. 6 workers for every job opening. That's not going to be the case going forward. So again, I'd say retraining economy.
Okay. I'm going to ask one last question of both of our panelists and then turn it over to the board. As we roll out the Doing What Matters for Jobs and Economy campaign, it's to ask the field their thoughts and how they would respond around 4 areas. First is give priority to what matters to jobs and economy, followed by make room for what matters in jobs and economy. Then student success matters in jobs and economy, and then innovate what matters to jobs and the economy. So if you had one wish, Nancy and Tim.
One second question.
Oh, you can answer that. Okay, I skipped a question that Nancy really wants to answer.
My second question.
Okay.
We've got 3, right?
That's right. Sorry. So Nancy, where would you recommend we change in order to live up to our workforce CTE mission?
Thank you. Well, we're only partway through this project, so I want to stress that. But I see a really major parallel here to the overall work of the Student Success Task Force, which was that there's just this tremendous opportunity, this tremendous potential, but we could benefit from having more focused priorities and then the supportive policies for that. Some of what we found so far are that we have, I'm going to talk about just some of our findings and then what it's implying for changes. Lots of student interest in career technical programs, and lots of student progress in coursework, but relatively few credentials awarded commensurate to that interest and progress. We have too many programs offered, it seems, to really serve students and employers well. So there are a lot of programs that don't serve very many students and don't graduate in terms of certificates or vocational associate degrees, don't yield many graduates. And here are a few numbers that are pretty startling. This is in our Part 2 report. We have, across the system, 12,500 local programs offered in 142 fields of study, and the average college offers 113 programs in 25 fields. One college offers 275 different CTE programs. But with all of those offerings, just 18 of the 142 fields, or just 13% of all the fields offered, accounts for 3/4 of the enrollment. So 13% of the fields serve 75% of the enrollment, and just 10 of the 142 fields, or just 6% of the fields, produces over half of the completions. So there are a lot of resources out there in programs that apparently are not serving many students or yielding many graduates. And it seems that there's kind of 2 different things going on. Some of the small colleges may be trying to offer a more comprehensive set of programs than maybe they can afford. And some of the larger colleges may not be taking enough advantage of the fact that there are other colleges right nearby that they could be collaborating with. So overall, it just seems like, and I think this relates to the regional and sector strategies, there's more room for collaborating in a way that would be more effective and for targeting to those programs that are really going to be of value in the workforce, really addressing that skills gap. We also found that similar programs, and we looked at in the same region, similar programs are structured, they're very different in length and size and content, and we fear that that's really confusing to students, and it's really confusing to employers. And we fear that really devalues a credential if an employer doesn't know what a certain credential means in terms of the skills and competencies that a student has. So just as one example, we looked at an associate degree in engineering technology in 3 different colleges in the same region. One of them, in terms of the major units required, one of them had 18 units, and one of them had 31 units. One of them has chemistry, one doesn't. One has calculus, one doesn't. So there's just not been the effort put in to try to make some common learning outcome standards so that employers know what they're getting. We found also a heavy reliance on competitive grants. So that results in really uneven capacity, unfortunately, across the system. You've got colleges that can afford grant writers, and the kind of winners get richer, and other colleges just can't because of the funding issues I mentioned earlier. And then a really big issue that keeps coming up in the task force and with the Hoover Commission is that the Chancellor's office just does not have the authority and the capacity to provide the kind of needed strategic leadership. It's been mostly in this area, and happily I know that's starting to change, but it's been mostly about compliance and grant administration and not enough to coordinate the program offerings, the program review processes, the labor market data availability, the pathways, and all of that. So in terms of priority for changes, 3 of them that have come out of our work so far. One is to really increase the capacity of the Chancellor's office to provide much more overall strategic direction and cohesion and appropriate policy and funding support for the mission. And I do want to stress at this point, I think that we know that CTE is a regional-based, local-based mission, but I think that it's really wrong to conclude from that there's no place for Chancellor's office overall strategic vision and coordination. I think it only strengthens the ability of the local mission to be carried out. Secondly, a review at all the colleges of their programs, what they offer, strengthening their offerings. Every college, I think, should review its offerings, focus on the ones that are really of value, and not necessarily measuring by student demand, because I don't think students, they see it on the books, they may sign up for it, it may fit their schedule. I think there's really a need to focus offerings on what's value in the workplace. And then finally, address the organizational structure we have in our report. We took this around and we consulted with a lot of you people over there and everybody, and the organizational structure around CTE and workforce development is really confusing. And so I think some kind of simplifying around the regional and the sector would be of benefit to the mission.
Okay, so I'm going to stop our questions here and just turn it over to the board.
Great. Member Baca, followed by Member Izumi.
Given my perspectives, there's a lot of insight there, Nancy, in terms of you're describing career tech. I think that most of those things that you brought up, I certainly would agree with. I think that many of the programs are heavily reliant, federal funding or other sources, in order to just maintain the ability to operate. But just following up on what you just said, in terms of the diversity throughout the state, in terms of career tech, and I guess a couple of questions. One is how much of the lack of statewide focus, or probably shouldn't say the lack of, but the different level of focus on career tech versus the transfer and other programs is attributed to that in your mind, to that diversity of operations and delivery of services in career tech, and how would you propose actually moving the Chancellor's office to greater involvement when you're going to have the resistance and the interest in obviously of local control? How do you see reconciling that and making it stronger? Just, you had your.
I don't see the kind of lack of as much attention as I think it deserves. I don't see that as coming from the diversity of the labor markets. I think that's deeper. I think that.
Well, not diversity of the labor market, but diversity in terms of the individual campuses and what they offer. You were mentioning that, you know, you've got some that are offering 215 certificates, and you seem to present that as problematic in terms of actually getting the work done. So I'm just wondering how you address not necessarily the labor market, but the individual programs as they exist on those.
Well, I think it's been, just been allowed to be kind of viewed as this local mission that doesn't benefit from more of a strategic direction and coherence. But if you really look at what's offered, I mean, there is a variety of sizes and programs, but by sector, there's a lot of commonality. A lot of commonality across the regions of the state in what's offered. I think we've just kind of let it, and because of the funding and the competitive, and you've got, you know, these heroes out there in the field, you know, scrambling to get all this money, and I think, not all this money, trying to get whatever money is available, applying for this and that grant, and I just think that it hasn't been given the priority that the other parts of the mission has been. So I'm afraid I'm not answering your question, but I'm not sure I understand
It's a
it.
difficult question to answer because I'm talking about how you affect a central, I guess, a centralized focus on what should be out there when you have the colleges and the districts saying this is where we want to go.
Right, and I think part of it comes from the lack of authority and the funding arrangements for the chancellor's office. So everything gets kind of pushed down to these regional levels, and they do, you know, they have to administer grants and they have to do all these things. And so I think it's really part and parcel to the whole way that the chancellor's office is structured and funded by statute.
Just have a real quick question of Tim, if I can.
Sure.
Ask
Go
with
ahead.
regard to WIA boards and community college involvement, your perspectives on that?
Yeah, I have a lot of perspectives on it,
Okay.
but I'll just give you a couple. Actually, I think maybe it relates back to your first question. How do we get this work to actually happen is what comes up for me a lot, and there's a lot of creative solutions and problem solving at the local and regional level. And Nancy and I were both talking earlier about, we were up in the state of Washington where they'd created regional skills panels. And the value of those is you get multiple college campuses, you get multiple workforce investment boards, you get industry, you get other folks, players at the regional level at the table at the same time, looking at the data, looking at the labor market data, and figuring out where the opportunities are going to be for workers and students. And then having the very difficult conversations around how to align the resources there. In California, we're moving in that same direction. Vaughn and I are applying for some federal dollars to focus on a few regions of the state to build some pilots that are modeled on this skills panel, regional skills panel work. Foundations are very interested in this, and we think we'll get some other funding for it. But what happens with the skills panels, they focus on specific sectors. They choose a few, they can't choose all, where there's real growth potential in the region. They listen to industry. And at the skills panel level, they address administrative and policy barriers together across systems, and they address those things. At the state level, we should be reflecting the regional effort. So we should have a state leadership group of education, training, employment services, departments and agencies across state government, all of us sitting at the table, understanding what the challenges are at the regional level, hearing from them, and doing our part to lift policy and administrative barriers, and seeking federal waivers when the federal dollars don't work. And so that there's this communication loop or a community of practice that's happening. And I think a lot of the problems could be solved that way. And I think the policy administrative change should follow that discussion and that learning.
Member Azumi, and then the Chancellor would like to say something, and then Member McDougall.
First of all, I want to thank the Vice Chancellor for bringing this panel together and Mr. Rainey and Dr. Schulach for your presentations and your answers. Just want to ask Dr. Schulach a question. You had mentioned that there were policies that prevented highly qualified instructors from becoming adjunct instructors at the local level in these CTE areas. Could you elaborate on that and say what exactly those policy impediments are?
I can't elaborate as much as you would like because we're still in the middle of working on our policy agenda. But what I've been told is that there are two aspects of that. One of them would be minimum qualifications. And the other, and I remember one example in particular somebody told me, and this may be a really small part of the issue, but somebody mentioned surveyors, and that used to be that you didn't need any kind of a degree that is a minimum qualification, so you can't hire like these very experienced surveyors. I don't want to overstate that example. But minimum qualifications. And the other was just the rules, and it may vary by college, it probably does, but where I was, the rules for assembling an adjunct pool from which then to carry out the hiring process. So it said that the rules are that the availability of adjuncts for the transfer mission, the liberal arts and transfer mission, you're just dealing with a really different availability of who these people are and how they want to fit part-time teaching into their careers. And so the rules about assembling pools and hiring from a pool should be different, should recognize these differences. But we will be looking into that a lot more in the coming months.
Chancellor.
You know, this area of career technical education is so important. My own career began as studying humanities. I was a professor, not of a career technical field, and so when I entered the community colleges, I knew little about what was then called vocational education. But it wasn't long before I became a convert, because I saw what a difference it made in the lives of people, and because I frankly view the diversity of people and recognize that fulfillment occurs in a variety of ways, whether it happens to be an auto mechanic or a PhD in philosophy. But I think Nancy Schulach has put her finger on several important policy issues. One is the matter of funding. You know, we are funded on the basis of FTES. And in nursing, it costs twice as much to teach in FTES as it does in, say, psychology. That's just the facts of the matter. And because of the equipment and because of the fact that clinical nursing requires a very small class, has to be small in nature. So we do need to look at that possibility of wonder if there might be a funding differential in terms of CTE. And there's a way in which the academic model, when it's been sort of clamped down on top of the CTE model, it doesn't always work. Let me illustrate. Sabbaticals. I, for a long time, have felt like that often CTE teachers, rather than taking a sabbatical, what they needed was to take a time out to go and work in the industry that they were teaching. You know, they didn't need to go to France. They needed to go, and if they're a machine shop teacher, they should have been given the opportunity to go back and hone their skills. So the sabbatical, there needs to be some thought about that. Also, a lot of CTE courses don't fit the Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 11 o'clock. A lot of them, you're individuals, you're working with people who are already at work, and you're retraining them. And so their schedules might well be evening schedules. And then, of course, the tenure problem. It's one thing to give tenure to English teachers because, you know, there's a whole lot of adjunct faculty, but let's say you have a very specialized career technical program and you're not sure that it's going to take. You're not going to want to hire a full-time teacher and suddenly find that you have someone who is, say, well equipped in construction, but if, for instance, if the construction classes suddenly contract, you don't have the flexibility to use that person to suddenly teach English or psychology. So we've got some policy issues, and we sort of have a one-size-fit-all in the community colleges. And so there's a lot of things to think through on this. But probably one of the most dynamic fields in community colleges for our future is CTE. I'm amazed, for instance, to hear about Cayuga Community College, which has two corporate colleges, they call them. There's a lot of possibilities of some kind of relationships between the business world and our world that we haven't fully explored. So I think we need to talk a lot more about career technical education, and we need to realize that some of the academic model fits career technical education, but some of it doesn't. And we need to, there's always still, in every society I've ever known, there are little hierarchies that, I'm better than you are because of this. And I remember once having a discussion with a philosophy teacher at the first college I was president of how that he felt how much more his course should be required than some career technical courses. And despite my PhD in history, I had to inform him that I thought career technical teachers were just as important to that institution as philosophy teachers. I think he was kind of disappointed in my response, thinking that he had found a kindred soul somewhere or another because of my own background. But those are just a few of my thoughts about how we need to think through and be inventive. And yes, we probably do need a little more centralized control in that, you don't want a dental hygienist program in this college and 10 miles to the other direction, another dental hygienist program, and they're both sort of crippling along. And, you want to say, well, maybe this one should have dental hygienist and this one should have radiological technology or something like that. So that's another issue. There are a lot of policy issues that we need to talk about, and we need to have a lot of career technical instructors at the table when we talk about it, because they will bring the insights that some of us don't necessarily have. But we should never, in any sense, deprecate the important role of career technical education to community colleges.
Member McDougall, last question.
Yeah, I think the Chancellor covered most of what I wanted to highlight, but I think essentially what I obtained from the presentation this morning is that we have a model for how our colleges operate that's been built on the traditional model of higher education and how higher education should operate. That in many respects, that model and all of the policies that reinforce it may lead to some dysfunctionality on how we might be most effective in carrying out our career technical education programs. And it's almost heretical to look at that basic kind of a question. But we are being told, and Mr. Rainey, I thought, reinforced that by talking, as I obtained from his comments, that a lot of what occurs has to be industry-driven. There must be multiple employees involved. There needs to be pathways well-defined. There need to be multiple on-ramps and off-ramps, which those things do not necessarily fit in the traditional higher education model which permeates our college. Yet we have this major and critical mission of career technical education. So I think it's been a tremendously valuable presentation. I think the Vice Chancellor has a real challenge, frankly, and I appreciate her bringing this here, but I think she's now charged with the responsibility of, number one, looking at these assumptions or theses and how dysfunctional they might be, and beginning to craft what might be alternative methodologies for where we can be most effective in carrying out our career technical education mission, and maybe looking at some fundamental changes in order to do that. But that,
Very well. Mr. Rainey, Professor Shulock, thank you very much for sharing with us today. Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Very good report.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one speaker, Jonathan Lightman of FACT. Jonathan, come on up.
Thank you, President Himmelstein, Chancellor Scott, and members of the board. Jonathan Lightman on behalf of the Faculty Association of California Community Colleges. And I'm also here on behalf of our contractual partner, the California Community College Association for Occupational Education. I can't begin to underscore the importance of this conversation, and I think that the people that you just heard from are extremely knowledgeable, and their information is incredibly valuable to you. I had the privilege of being in the state of Washington with Tim Rainey on a trip to kind of explore what they were doing with career technical education, and it was a very instructive process. What I would like to share with you is that as we discuss what we're going to do with this February surprise, and as we approach the next year's budget, we need a theme that we can rally around that is going to create a different level of conversation, because we are in a downward spiral of unprecedented proportion, and some other states, in fact, are already experiencing budget surpluses, which means that we're doing something wrong. California continues to have the second highest unemployment rate in the country, followed by Nevada. That is the only state that is doing worse than us. The information that you heard today by this panel in terms of what community colleges can do to reduce that unemployment rate needs to be that common theme. And while I appreciate the sentiment that we need to follow up, and perhaps at our September meeting, in fact, this needs to be part of your agenda at every single meeting. We need to go to the administration and to say that the community colleges have an immediate role to play in taking those employers that right now have a skills deficiency in terms of the workers that they have a demand for, and our ability to fill this. And this is the value of this money. Chancellor Scott and Vice Chancellor Garcia, Manuel Baca, President Himmelstein, and I, we were in Congress together. We were lobbying on behalf of the President's initiative in terms of $8 billion going for worker retraining. There is a great alignment here. When we had the hearing on the Student Success Task Force in the Capitol, there were questions. In fact, there were a lot of questions about what the impact of the report is going to be on CTE. And frankly, what the legislators are interested in is how do we combine all of these conversations and use it to advance the economy. What I could share with you as a lobbyist who's been registered since 1989 or 90 or something like that, that today, given the fact that unemployment is the biggest problem, there is not a single common theme in terms of a solution. We have this opportunity, and so I implore you to follow up with as much attention and with as much press attention as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.